When we come to the Judean king Jehoshaphat, the contrast between the Chronicles and the books of Samuel and Kings becomes even clearer. Jehoshaphat was not given much space in the earlier stories, and mainly appeared as part of the stories of the northern kingdom, and in particular its worst king Ahab. He was still portrayed as one of the better kings, but the chronicler must have thought that he was not given his due, as much more space is given to him here. Of any king from the period of the divided monarchy, only Hezekiah is given more space. But it's not simply that the chronicler liked Jehoshaphat. We have seen the tendency to downplay or even omit the greater sins of David and Solomon. The chronicler wants to present examples of faithfulness and greatness. In this way, his stories are not the same rich theological history as Samuel and Kings, which tell a much bigger story about the true King of Israel, God. That story is concerned with the demands of his people to effectively replace him, and follows the gradual rise of the monarchy, its apogee in David and Solomon, and then its gradual decline along the same old patterns of cultural assimilation, idolatry, social disorder, military defeat, chaos and bloodshed. But the chronicler, as we have seen, has not been interested in that huge story arc and the tales of faithfulness rewarded with faithlessness and the inevitable consequences. As we have seen in earlier videos, the chronicler assumes the reader's knowledge of Samuel and Kings. This is reflected in our passage in verses 3 and 4 of chapter 17, which depends on the Baal worship of the northern kingdom of Elijah's time being well known. But instead the chronicler wants to focus on the highlights, as it were, and the most meaningful achievements of the southern monarchy, which were the capture of Jerusalem, the establishment of the house of David, the building of the temple, and the ordering of the temple service. When the chronicler drops the more dismal episodes of our heroes, it is not that he is whitewashing the past. Rather, the up and down nature of the biblical story from Genesis to the end of 2 Kings, which is sometimes bleak and unbearable, and sometimes wonderful and inspiring, is not the same kind of story that he wants to tell. That has already been done. The chronicler wants now to focus on the good that was done, especially the untold stories. Jehoshaphat then appears in his own right and not as a character in the story of Ahab. Nevertheless, the chronicler does not want to eschew the story of the demise of Ahab and retells it pretty much as it appears in 1 Kings. It is followed by a rebuke from the prophet Jehu, who we already met in 1 Kings 16. The first verse of chapter 19 says that Jehoshaphat returned in safety to his house in Jerusalem, though the Hebrew is actually returned in peace, echoing what Micaiah said to Ahab in 18:27. If you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me. In this way, attention is drawn to the truth of the oracle, because only 1 king returned in peace, and it was not Ahab. Moreover, Micaiah has said in verse 16 that the Lord had said in the vision, "Let each one go home in peace." The role and impact of true prophecy in Israel is immediately underlined with Jehu's rebuke and word of forgiveness. Chapter 17 had described the prestige of Jehoshaphat in some detail. In verse 5 it says he had great riches and honour, which is repeated at the beginning of chapter 18. This is, as one commentator notes, an implicit rebuke, for why then make an alliance with Ahab? His wealth and security make his decision seem all the more unnecessary. The marriage alliance brought Ahab's daughter Athaliah into his family, who we might remember was a predictably rotten egg. Thus there are lasting consequences for his decision. But Jehu focuses on Jehoshaphat's attitude and questions why he should love those who hate the Lord. Nevertheless, the Lord knows that Jehoshaphat really does love God, despite this significant error, and the proof is in his program of destruction of both the sacred poles and the high places. Also mentioned though not by Jehu, is the education program, where a company of officials and Levites and priests went throughout Judah teaching the law of Moses. This is told in chapter 17. Is this why the chronicler decided to retell this whole story? Certainly prophecy is important to him, and this episode is a great example of it. But perhaps in wanting to expand Jehoshaphat's story with things left out of Kings, the chronicler also felt it was necessary to show that his ill-judged relationship with Ahab was reckoned with and forgiven, which does not take place in Kings. But in any case, the past has been dealt with, and now the chronicler can move on with the other brighter stories of Jehoshaphat's reign.